We were right in the middle of those sand dunes when the whole place lit up like daylight. We both looked up and there was this really bright light focused on us from about 600 feet up. It wasn't perfectly round, it was oblique, and you could see panel lines in it, everything, and it was slowly rotating. The crickets all stopped, the frogs, you couldn't hear anything. We were just kind of staring at that light for maybe 6 or 8 seconds, and the light winked out. The medic, when I walked in the door, he said, "What'd you do, fall asleep on the beach? Because you're bright red." I had this like bright red skin. He said I obviously had a radiation burn.
Hi everyone, and welcome back to That UFO Podcast. As always, my name is Andy, and my guest today is one I am incredibly excited for. I'll just say this now, I have a small list of names that since I started the podcast 6 years ago, I've wanted to speak to. And now and again, a name pops up, and this is one of those names I've wanted to speak to for some time. So my guest today is a former US Army intelligence officer and the first remote viewer recruited into the US government's psychic espionage program, later known as Project Stargate. Over nearly 2 decades, he participated in hundreds of operational sessions for US intelligence agencies and was awarded the Legion of Merit for his work. Welcome to the podcast, Joe McMoneagle.
Oh, I'm glad to be here, Andy.
Very good to have you on, sir. I'm glad you're fighting fit. You're feeling well. A lot of folks have been asking for this one. Originally, we were going to speak back in November, I think it was, right, 2025. Exactly. You had a little issue to deal with at that time, but you have very kindly kept in touch with me. We've got it sorted out. Here we are now in February 2026. And Joe, you have lived what must be one of the most fascinating lives I've ever read about, listened to, or watched through various interviews over the years. But what I want to do here is give listeners a flavour of what your entire life has been like. But can you take us back to your very early years? And I want to know, what was your upbringing like as a child? And were there any experiences that maybe in hindsight you feel were particularly relevant?
It all was particularly relevant. I grew up in a slum in Miami, down in Miami, Florida. And the area I was in, which was on about Northwest 2nd Avenue and 79th Street, was mostly refugees, Cuban refugees, refugees from Papadox Island, Chicanos, blacks. I was a token white kid in the neighborhood, and there was about 6 gangs. And unfortunately, I had 4 younger sisters, and so I had to take care of my sisters and keep them out of trouble. And so I grew up needing to know what the neighborhood was going to do before I could do anything. And so I got to be very observant, what I call situationally aware. And I would never agree to join a gang. But as I was growing up, I had an incident when I was about 15. I was with my mother downtown, walking on a park across from the courthouse. It's right on the water. And it was a pretty hot day. And so I went over and got a drink out of a water fountain. And my mother had a meltdown because it said colored only. And so I got immediately taken to the doctor. The doctor read me the riot act. And I said, this is crazy. It's really offensive. And I kept arguing against it. And the more I argued against it, the worse I got fed back information. And so I made a decision. I was going to get the hell out of Miami first chance I got. So right after my 18th birthday, when I had graduated from high school, I actually had 2 scholarships to universities. I skipped them both and went straight in the Army. And the Army, people say, the Army, yeah, why couldn't you have gone in the Coast Guard or something calmer? And the only reason I went in the Army is I talked to everybody. I went to the recruiter for Marines, Navy, Air Force, and even the Coast Guard. But I kept going back to the Army because that was the only person that wasn't lying to me. He kept throwing me out of his office. He kept saying, go somewhere else. All you're going to learn to do here is launch bullets and catch bullets. and you're too smart for that. But I kept going back there, so that's why I enlisted. And I think my test scores kind of escorted me into the intelligence area. They recruited me right after my AIT for a weapon. They called me in and told me that my weapon was obsoleted, that they were taking it out of the Army. They weren't really. They were trying to push me out the door to look for work, which I did. And I met a guy with a beard, and he recruited me. So that's how I wound up in intelligence.
Yeah, and it's most of this interview is going to circle around the remote viewing aspect of your life, because it has played such a major part of your life. I often talk about remote viewing on this podcast, as much as the title is That UFO Podcast.
Sure.
You had a UFO experience before the Stargate program in the Bahamas. Can you just take us back to there? What happened, and did it change how you saw reality?
I was because I was in intelligence, I went to 3 more schools, and I graduated first in the class in 2 of them and second in the class in 1. And that was when they were block allocating everybody to Vietnam. But the top 3 students in each class got sent somewhere else. So at the end of my 3 schools, I wound up in the Bahamas. The island was named Eleuthera. It was maybe half a mile wide at its widest point, and about 116 kilometers long. And they were going independent at the time from the UK. And America offered some assistance. They said, no, we want to do it on our own. So we asked if they would allow us to put an air sea rescue unit in there, or a missile tracking unit for downrange from Cape Canaveral. And they said yes. So I was part of an 8-man unit that was put on Eleuthera, which was important because Eleuthera was like the breadbasket for all the Bahamas. They grew all the food there. And so that's where I was for 18 months. I logged probably 3,800 hours diving, and it ended up rescuing some people off a couple of yachts. So it was in 1966, and that's where the UFO event happened. It happened on a weekend when I and my partner, we worked in pairs. I and my partner, Steve, we had 2 or 3 days off. We were going to go fishing. So that night, we actually we had an outdoor theater where the downrange engineers and people from like William Bendix, RCA Victor, that kind of thing, they could watch these first-run movies from the United States. It was outside because the weather was beautiful there all the time. So we went to the movies, double feature. It was the first James Bond movie came out. It's either Dr. No or From Russia with Love. I can't remember, but
Dr. No.
Yeah, we liked sitting outside because you could raise your hand and yell nurse, and a young girl in a white outfit would come down and take a drink of water. So you get pretty obliterated watching a movie. Yeah. And after the movie, we went to the bar. We didn't have anything to do for 2 days. So we stayed in the bar till about 1 in the morning, and then decided to go down to our quarters, which was closer to the ocean. And on the paved road, if you walk down on the paved road to the quarters, it was about 3/4 of a mile. And it would take, some time. But you could take a shortcut behind the bar. You could go over the top of the sand dunes. They had a big hill of sand dunes where the big cisterns were, where they captured rainwater.
Mm-hmm.
And you could cut through there and save half the time. So since we were going to go fishing at 7 in the morning, we took the shortcut. We were right in the middle of those sand dunes when the whole place lit up like daylight. I mean, it was like high noon. And of course, when everything lights up like that, you look for the source of the light. And so we both looked up, and there was this really bright light focused on us from about 600 feet up. It's like a cone of light. And above it was this monstrous vehicle of some kind. It wasn't perfectly round. It was oblique. And you could see panel lines in it. everything, and it was slowly rotating. And when we were in the light, we couldn't hear anything. It was like being in a bell jar. The crickets all stopped, the frogs, you couldn't hear anything. And we were just kind of staring at that light for maybe 6 or 8 seconds. And the light winked out. And just about the time it came into focus, it vanished. It went away so fast. All I can tell you is we had no idea what direction it went. And in the years after, I've been thinking about it a lot, and it's quite possible that it might have just folded out of reality. I don't know. But the one thing I remember is when you're a little tipsy and you look up, you got to hold on to something or you're going to fall down. And I was holding on to this small young palm tree growing out of the sand with my right hand. When I looked up and the light went out and I looked down, the palm tree was on my left. But it was only like 8 seconds. And so I don't know what happened in that 8 seconds, but the next morning, we went back to the bar and we had another 6-pack and discussed the whole thing, and very quietly between us. And we made a decision we weren't going to tell anybody about it, because the problem was we figured first off, nobody would believe us. Secondly, they think we were crazy and we probably get shipped off to Vietnam, and we like being in the Bahamas. So we didn't tell anybody. We got down to the quarters. We went down and walked on the paved road this time. Got to our quarters and went to sleep. The next morning, I got up about 6:45, and I didn't feel well. I thought I had a really bad hangover. So I decided we were going to go fishing later. So I walked down to my buddy's quarters, Robert's, and he wasn't there. His door was standing open. So I asked the man across from him, I said, where's Steve? And he said, he went out of here at 4 a.m. in an ambulance. They took him to the airstrip and flew him to Florida, to a hospital in Florida. I said, really? What was wrong? And he says, I have no idea. So I was feeling pretty bad too. And I was thinking, well, maybe he had something and maybe I should get checked out. So they had a small naval unit there that were medics. And so I reported on sick call there. And the medic, when I walked in the door, he said, what'd you do? Fall asleep on the beach? Sleep on the beach all day? I said, no, why are you saying that? And he said, because you're bright red. I had this like bright red skin. And so he said, fill out this form. And I started to fill out the form. And when he saw what I was putting on there, he freaked out. He took it away, tore it up, put it in a burn bag. He said, don't ever write that again. Just say bad sunburn. So I put bad sunburn. And he gave me these pills to take for the next 2 weeks. He said I obviously had a radiation burn. So it turns out that's what happened to Steve. He was in the hospital for 2 weeks and then came back. When he came back, it was interesting because I asked him when we were privately together, I said, Steve, do you remember what happened? He said, oh yeah, I remember it perfectly. I said, okay, can you recall it for me? And he said, yeah. We saw this red truck. It was on the side of the road, and we stopped, and it had a problem with the radiator, and I was taking the cap off the radiator and it exploded in my face. And I said, no, that's not what I'm talking about. And so he said, well, that's what happened. And I said, okay, let's presume that that's what you believe. What happened before we saw the red truck? He couldn't remember. And so what happened after the red truck? Couldn't remember. I said, Steve, there's not a red truck on this whole island. So where's this coming from? But to this day, he believes that. Now what's interesting about the whole thing as well, he was wearing we wore civilian clothes there. He was wearing a Bohemian shirt, one that doesn't tuck in. It just does a straight hem around the bottom. And on the front, it had 2 stripes with a couple palm trees sewn into the cloth. It was a light green. And to this day, when he opens his shirt, you can see the residuals of the palm trees and the two stripes on both sides. So he got embossed with the palm trees. And I always kidded him about where did that come from? He says he didn't remember. But he, to this day, has no memory of the event. And I don't understand that.
Do you feel that event had any bearing on what was to come in your life in terms of the remote viewing capability?
No, I really don't. When I eventually did go overseas after the Bahamas, I went straight to Vietnam. And after Vietnam, I did some time in other countries. I spent almost 14 straight years overseas doing an active intelligence mission. And eventually they brought me back to the headquarters. But in all that time, that was just an event that happened in the Bahamas. And I've never forgotten it. I mean, it was really impressive. I have no idea what the vehicle was. It was real, I can tell you that, because you could actually see how it was constructed underneath. You could see the panel lines and the way it was put together, and it looked like reflective metal. And over time, I've considered that it probably did not fly away, probably just folded out of reality in some way. In that 8 seconds, we both got burned pretty good. I don't think I got burned as badly as him because I was the diver. And okay. I spent all the hours in the sun anyway and had some protection.
Did you ever in later years ask anyone to remote view the situation for you as to find out more?
No. It's possible that they might have done that in the remote viewing unit, but it wasn't to my knowledge. They never told me. And when I was in the unit, the remote viewing unit, I was in it the rest of the time I was in the military, which is about 7 years. And then when I retired, I went into the science side. I worked for Stanford Research Institute. When they shut it down there, I went to Science Applications International Corporation, which continued the remote viewing research. And then when they shut the whole project down, I went to Laboratories for Fundamental Research in Palo Alto and continued remote viewing up until 2 years ago. So I've been a remote viewer for 48 years.
So let's talk about that then. It's fascinating that incident happened, and like you say, there's no bearing. It wasn't like some folks claim an experience happens, whether it's an alien or UFO experience. Some folks report out of body near-death experiences and it causes something to happen. But for you, completely separate. How does the remote viewing aspect of your life begin then?
The reason they actually brought me into the remote viewing unit is when I came back to the United States to the headquarters, I did everything I could not to go to the headquarters. I had been 14 years in the field doing a real mission, and I didn't want to push papers. And so I tried to get out of it. In Department of the Army, when I talked to the people there, they said, no, this is a special request from a 3-star. You can't. It's the commander for all the security and intelligence in the Army. And we can't change it. So what I did is I asked them what the highest demand was for a language. I had maxed my DLAT language test. And so they said it was Chinese Mandarin. So I said, okay, I'd like to read it, write it, and speak it. So they said, well, for that, we can change. And so I went to Monterey I had orders for 2 years immersed in Mandarin. And when I got there, I was only there about 3 hours, and I got this phone call at the orderly room. And I went down to the orderly room, and it was a guy on the phone, and he said, do you know who I am? And I said, no, sir, I don't. He said, I'm the guy that expects you to be in his office at 9 o'clock on Monday. This was a Saturday. And he said, you better be there, and he said some other things, and then hung up on me. And the orderly, I was using a regular phone, and the orderly all the way across the room said, "Wow, that sounded like an order to me." You could actually hear the whole conversation. The guy was yelling so hard. It was the general, and he was really pissed off that I had gone to Monterey and not to his headquarters. So when I got to the headquarters, I found out why. What they did is he decided I should be a warrant officer. So I got commissioned as a warrant officer, a chief warrant officer, and put in charge of my MOS for the world. So that I was there. Now, in working for the general, I was his advisor, and he was in charge of all the security and intelligence for the Army. So it was a pretty important job. And in the processes of doing that, I made some decisions which got me to brief him on some things. And I think it kind of prevented him from walking into some ambushes or walking into some technical problems. And so he considered me as being somewhat like a radar or O'Malley on MASH or something, always a half step ahead of him.
Yep.
So when he came out and said, we're going to do this new project, they didn't call it remote viewing then. They called, I can't remember what it was called, gondola wish, I think. When we're going to do this new project, he said, I believe it's kind of hinky. And what he meant was he didn't trust it. He didn't know anything about it, and it bothered him. So he sent me to Stanford Research Institute to ask questions about it. He wanted me to be fully briefed on it so I could protect his backside. So I went there, and when I was there, I was asking so many questions. The people there said, well, look, if you do a couple, you'll understand what it is. And I said, do a couple of what? They said remote viewing. So I did I think 6 remote viewings over a 3-day period where they would send somebody somewhere and I would have to describe where they were. I said, I don't understand what you're asking me for because I don't know where they are. How am I going to tell you anything about it? And they said, well, just say whatever pops in your head. So I did some drawings for each one. And then when it was independently judged, it turns out that I was the first person to get 5 first place matches and 1 near first place. It was a second place match. And that's a record that hasn't been beaten since. So I got back to Arlington at the headquarters, and my desk was empty. So I went down to the general's office. I said, why is my desk empty? And he said, I've decided I want you to be in this project. I'm going to send you to Fort Meade. So I went to Fort Meade and I got recruited into the project as the first remote viewer. That was in October of 78. So I got 001. What's funny is the next guy they were going to recruit was going to get 002. And the major said, oh, no, you can't do that because then you'll be telling everybody how many remote viewers we have. So he got 385.
Yeah, I love that. That's very clever.
Yeah, that's kind of funny. But anyway, so I became a remote viewer.
When you mentioned the 4 matches, am I right in saying the first match, like you say, is like near perfect? That's spot on. Second is close. Third is in the ballpark, but 4 is no match at all. Is it something like that?
Right. It was. You could get one of 4 different scores. You get first, second, third, or fourth. Fourth is absolutely nothing like it. Third is a relatively very small part. Second is maybe a 50-50, but a first place match is almost 90% or better. There's no question. If you laid 50 photographs out on a table, you could take the drawing I did and match it to that photograph.
Yeah.
And know that's where the person was. So 5 first place matches was unheard of. It just
what were you thinking when you heard that you had been so accurate?
Well, I actually got in an argument with Russell Targ. He was one of the researchers. And we were sitting in this windowless room for like 20 minutes. And he said, well, are you going to write something or draw something? And I said, what am I supposed to do? Just invent something? And he said, just whatever pops in your head. I said, okay, so you want me to invent something? So I closed my eyes, and what popped in my head, I drew. And I made some mistakes now. Like one of the first place matches was a restaurant next to a yacht club where they had sailboats, and in front was a big parking lot. Well, I drew the restaurant exactly like it looked, put in the parking lot, the front, put in the sailboats on the left. But the thing I left out is the restaurant had a boat on the roof.
Right.
I said, nobody in their right mind would put a boat on a roof. He said, well, we don't understand why you left that out. I said, because nobody would ever put a boat on the roof. What are you, crazy? But I saw the boat on the roof. I just didn't put it on there.
What was your first meeting like with Russell Targ? And I'll just say, folks, if you've not heard of Russell Targ, I interviewed him last year, and it was wonderful, much like yourself, Joe, to speak to Russell. It was incredible to speak to, incredible gentleman, much like yourself. But Hal Puthoff and Russell Targ, what was it like meeting them? Was the first time together, or was that separate?
I met them both at the same time. Russell's a unique individual. You're absolutely right. He's legally blind, but he rides a small motor scooter to work. And we always knew when he was arriving at Stanford, because the research center, because you could hear all the horns off the cars beeping at him. He just fell right in front of him. So, but he was a unique guy. He pretty much a Buddhist from a spiritual standpoint, and was always interested in the more spiritual sides of it. While Hal Puthoff, the man in charge of the lab, was more involved in the science, the protocol, keeping the protocol pure. The protocol is interesting. You can't, if you want to do a remote viewing, the actual protocol is you have to be in a room with whoever's in there with you. Can't know what the target is either. So everybody's totally blind. There's no hints. You just sit there with a pad of paper and a pen or a pencil, and you try to figure out what it is that's coming into your head about that location. So what I've learned over the years, I've been doing this for 48 years now, I like to think of it as a martial art of the mind. When you first start, you can hit some things. Over about 2 or 3 years, you can get fairly good at it and produce information of good enough quality for intelligence. But over 10 or 15 or 30 years, you can really produce some interesting work. Just before I retired, I did a test for one of the agencies. I can't name the agency, but what I did is I tracked a spy. They asked me if I could track a spy, and I said, sure. And I was called 3 times over a few months. And usually it was at an inappropriate time. They'd call me on the phone and say, where's the spy now? And all I had to target that person with was the Social Security number. And the Social Security number doesn't tell you if it's male or female, and they could be any age, 14 to 75. So, and nobody in the lab, because I had been working in the labs for about 33 years by then, nobody in our lab knew where the person was from or who it was. And yet the first 3 times I was called, I drew the picture of exactly where that person was standing. So over the years, your skill set gets better and better. People think that remote viewing is simple. It's easy. It's just like closing your eyes and seeing something. But you learn a lot about it over time. Like closing your eyes is not a good idea, because when you close your eyes, you're cutting out all of your perceptive powers for smell, touch, feel, emotion, everything except visual. When you close your eyes, you're looking to see something. It's not the same thing as seeing, it's perceiving. And so calling it remote viewing was a mistake. It makes everybody think you only close your eyes and see something. No, if that's all you think about it, that's not remote viewing. Secondly, a lot of people who don't do well, they'll give them a hint. Like if they're looking for a missing person, they may say they may show them a picture of the person. That's a violation of the protocol. Because when you see the person, you'll start making assumptions about them based on how they look, what their sex is, how old they are, those kinds of things. You don't want to be doing that. You want to be getting totally what's coming in psychically. And so any violation of the protocol, it's not remote viewing. It may be psychic functioning, but it's not remote viewing.
So let me say this then, Joe, because I think some of the things that people level at you, for example, when I spoke to some of my friends to say, I've got a remote viewer coming on, this is what remote viewing is. A lot of them, when I say, what would you ask them? Because I like to do that sometimes, folks who have got no interest in these topics, just to see what they would say. And a lot of the times they come back with things like, well, why don't they just remote view the lottery numbers? But that's to your point. You can't just go and see something that you know or you're expecting. It's got to be that blind target.
Well, over the years, I've been tested on words as an example. In the case where I was doing the words, we were a half a mile apart in two different trailers, and the people that were were randomly choosing the word, and they were using these big white cards, 1 by 1 foot cards with a black letter, and they were spelling the word out on a whiteboard. They would put these cards up on a whiteboard on a ledge, so the word was clearly visible. Well, I did 7 words, and I got 5 of them. So they said, you must be seeing the word. And I said, no, I don't think I am. I think what I'm doing is something different. So let's do 2 more words. And this time, scramble the letters, which they did. They scrambled the letters and just put them up on the wall. And I still got the words. And I think the reason why is what you're getting is the sense of the meaning of the word, and then working backwards to fit it into the number of letters they want to see, like a 7-letter word or a 5-letter word, that sort of thing. So it doesn't work the way you make assumptions about it. So you have to be very, very careful. And the second problem is every human being on the planet is different. There's no 2 people on this planet that are identical. We all think differently because from birth to whatever age you are, you're different socially, economically, educationally, intelligently, religiously, spiritually. All these different things, your culture even, impacts heavily on how you believe, what you believe, how you think. So you can't say, you can say remote viewing can be done by anyone. That's true. But only with some training can you say, I'm now wearing like a white belt for remote viewing. Yet to get to the brown belt, it's going to take years, 5 years maybe. It actually, in training someone for remote viewing who has a natural talent, it takes about 2 years for them to produce things of value. So in the military, when we used it, that training process was there. When I first started, I had 24 straight failures. And the primary reason why is my ego got in the way. I thought I was a great psychic because of the good job I did at Stanford. No, it's the exact opposite. Ego, you got to get your ego out of it because ego is what destroys it. There's just so many things you have to learn. And I think people want it to be easy, though. They think, oh, well, you just draw a picture of where the person is, so it must be something you see. No, it's perception, and you have to build that picture bit by bit. And it takes a long time to learn how to do that in your head. and everybody is affected differently by it. Everybody perceives things differently. I think one of the difficulties comes out of the fact that when we walk into a place and we look at it with our eyes, we're thinking, we're in our head looking through eyes and we're seeing something.
Mm-hmm.
That's not true. What's happening is we're seeing a field of nothing but energy, photons and whatnot, and our rods and cones and our sensors are picking it up, sending it to an area in the back of our skull where we're deciding what all that means. And so we're never actually seeing what's there. We're actually observing what the parts that we need to assume what it is. So you can take 10 strangers into a room that's empty and leave them in there for 30 seconds and bring them out and say, what's the room used for? And you'll get 10 different answers, because people only see what they need to understand what the room is. You understand where I'm going with this?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Does remote viewing then, you say ego plays a part of it and bias can play a part of the interference in what you're perceiving?
Yes.
I'll tie this back in then. Many folks would say things like remote viewing, or whatever you want to call it, have been something we as a species have been able to do for many, many, many millennia.
Oh, yes.
But it's
hundreds
over that
of thousands
time.
of years. Yeah.
Over the time, though, I suppose in modern days, your coffee, your cigarettes, your alcohol, the technology around you, the religions around you, Western culture, wherever you live, all of that, then do you feel that dampens those abilities and suppresses it?
Well, the problem is, if you go back far enough, humans for probably 10,000 years had no language. There was no letters, didn't exist to make a language. All we could do was grunt and point and make emotional sounds, maybe.
Mm-hmm.
So in some way we were communicating, and the communication had to be effective, because if the men are hunting and the women are gathering, we're vulnerable. If you're out there hunting a dangerous animal and there's only 6 men in your very tiny little tribe, you got to know what each person's doing exactly when they're doing it in order to survive. So what remote viewing is based on, I think, what it comes out of is this mechanism that I would call a survival mechanism. It's like the way we thought to stay alive. And we could interact with one another probably in a psychic way to ensure that survival. Where we came into a problem is when we started trusting other small tribes. I think most of the tribes of people were probably less than 15 people. They were probably more related to one another than not. They maybe take mates from other tribes in order to keep the DNA pool healthy, but we didn't trust any other tribes. And so when 2 tribes started coming together and sharing a cave, some issues came up. If you can read the intentions of someone just by looking at them, that's a dangerous thing, because now you're sitting across a fire from a stranger, and he's oogling your woman, or he's checking your spear out, and you just come across the fire and kill him because he's threatening your means of survival. That can't work. So Mother Nature does what Mother Nature does. It makes changes, or it puts in filters to prevent that from happening. And over time, as you're building language and you're building the capacity for writing and keeping records, that mistrust is filtered in some way to tamp it down. So there's more cooperation. And over time, you now have ways of going somewhere and reading about something, studying about something, getting an answer out of Google now. So you don't need to be that ultra sensitive person anymore. That's what we've progressed to. The problem is, it's a very basic nature that we have that has caused us to become survivors. against a world where there were way more capable animals with teeth, huge fangs, size. I mean, when you stop and think about the fact that we're the ones covering the earth now, and the cave bears aren't, it tells you something. It's that intellectual part or the psychic part that I think was part of the survival mechanism. And where you see that is you see it in combat with soldiers, surviving soldiers. You see it in the police departments, sheriff's departments, border guards, that sort of thing, where they operate alone in many cases or operate after dark. In order to survive, they have a situational awareness that's very heightened in comparison to your average person. And you also see it in firemen. Firemen will go into a building to fight a fire from different angles with the hoses, but they all seem to know when to back out before the building collapses. How's that work? And I've even talked to surgeons who have the ability to know what to do in a crunch in the surgical suite where they don't have time to react. They just make the right decision. So, it's part of our natural ability. It's just that more people have used it since birth where others haven't. So if I had not grown up, I think, in that ghetto where I was at risk all the time, I probably would not have developed the ability that I had to survive any of the Army experiences. It's certainly not the remote viewing would have been terrible because I would have never used it before. I wouldn't even think about it. So I think there are some people that just have a propensity for going in that direction. And those are the people who become really good remote viewers. The idea that anybody can do it is true, but the idea that you don't have to work at it is not. I mean, you really got to work at it. I've been working at this, improving my skill set for over 45 years, and I've never stopped. I kept hammering away at it. If you stop, your progression starts to fall away because it has a lot to do with your belief structure, has a lot to do with what you accept as truth and not truth. So it's a complicated issue.
Let's take you back to the Army then, and you've got those initial days and weeks underway. You've had those successful tests. You think there's something to this. What then happens? What's the process from there?
I think one of the major milestones is coming to having to accept the fact that you actually can produce something very specific about an area, place, an event, a thing that you have absolutely no access to. And the reason why is because if the protocol is kept pure, which means you have no access to any information about the target, everyone you're interacting with has no access to that, and you produce something that, for instance, saves a life. When you go look back at it historically, and you know what you did to affect that, you go, wow, that's a gift. That's something I've never realized that I could do. And it improves you immediately by your having to acknowledge that you can do something you never thought possible. So you grow spiritually, you grow physically, you grow mentally, you grow in all different ways. And that progressive improvement in your abilities has a profound effect on you. You just keep getting better. Where the problem comes in is where that protocol is not kept pure. And let's say you're working on a missing person or somebody who's been kidnapped, for instance, and somebody says, well, they were taken from this city. Well, they just introduced the probability of where they might have gone from there. When in fact they might have changed their whole modus operandi anyway. When General Dozier was kidnapped in Ravenna, Italy, he was taken by the Rote Brigada, the Red Brigade. Now, their modus operandi was to immediately cross into an iron block country and disappear. And so that was the reason you could never find them, and you'd have to pay a ransom or something to get the person back. In this particular case, they had a 12-hour head start, and there were 9 countries they could have gotten to in 12 hours. But they didn't do that. They changed completely. They went across the new town area to the old town area. This is the same city. And the reason we knew that is because 2 remote viewers walked in and said that. They said, he's being held in a city named Padua. And Padua was the archaic name for the very city he was taken from. So that told them 2 things. He's in the old part of the city, and he's in the same city. And that changed the whole modus operandi. So that made the finding of him much easier. Now, there were a lot of other stuff that came to play. The police got a hold of a cousin or an uncle or something of one of the Red Brigade members who knew when they showed him a dead-end road that he had an apartment in that building. So the police said, well, if they got him there, they might have taken him into the apartment. And so, a lot of things started coming together. That's how remote viewing works. It doesn't come up with the actual answer, but it comes up with bits and pieces that glue other information together. It does things that allow the analysis to have sort of an open window on one side where they can see things that make the other things more valuable that they already know.
For you, Joe, was there a transition period from the early days of the initial testing to going into more serious cases and finding
absolutely.
individuals? What was that transition like?
Well, I can give you a primary example. I wrote a paper on it 35 years ago, and it's an important paper because where I got the information from had nothing to do with remote viewing. I started thinking about what makes remote viewing work and work better. And what I noticed was all the elements that make any business in the world profitable has to be in remote viewing. And the very first thing out of that is intention. You have to intend to build a company that's going to make money. If you don't have a clear intention for how to do that, it's never going to happen. If you don't have everybody on the same intention, it's very difficult to make it happen. All your employees have to have a shared intention with you in order for your business to do well. Well, in remote viewing, it's the same thing. So one of the reasons why it worked so effectively in the Army is almost without exception, every case we worked on, and we worked for 17 of 19 major intelligence agencies in America, every case we worked on was a life and death issue. Maybe it was somebody taken by force and being tortured to death for information. Well, if they knew that, everybody in the room had the intention of saving that person, to include the viewer. And you could feel it when you walked in the room. Everybody wanted to get to the same thing. It's unbelievable the way that consolidates information collection. It's incredible. So we were able to do really exciting things with the remote viewing in the military because almost without exception, all of our tasks were life and death issues. It made all the difference in the world. You go out and start playing with remote viewing on where did your buddy go last night when he had his girlfriend with him. No, that's not going to work because half the people in the room trying to conceptualize that don't care. It's one of the reasons you do an experiment with remote viewing in any lab, you start off with the fact that the scientist in charge doesn't care whether it succeeds or fails because they get to publish. That's their whole job. Keep a neutral interest and publish whether it failed or succeeded. The only person in a experimental view, from an experimental viewpoint about remote viewing, is the remote viewer who wants to be successful. Everybody else is off somewhere else in their head with intention. But if you walk everybody into a room and the scientist in charge goes up to the whiteboard and says, we want to be successful here because if we can't, we will get no money for more research and everybody will have to go find work. You see how that brings everybody together to be successful? Okay, so you get everybody on the same sheet of music with intention. So the second thing you got to worry about is the details of it. When you build an operation, they reach a certain point. You have to understand the steps that are necessary and all the details about that. If you have everybody on the same sheet of music, everybody understands the details that need to succeed, then your expectation for outcome becomes the third thing that you got to worry about. If everybody shares the same expectation, guess what? It works like gangbusters. Throw a frivet in any of that, and it starts falling apart. It's the way business works. So why shouldn't remote viewing work that way? Or why shouldn't artistic endeavor work that way? Or inventions work that way? Everything works that way, which is why I generated the paper. And so it's not simply you bring somebody in and say, you show a little psychic ability, so give us a psychic answer for this thing that we have a problem with. And the people standing in front of you know all about the problem. And half the people don't care if you're successful or don't believe you ever will be. It's not going anywhere. You understand?
Yeah.
And the reason I could say that is I've got 35 plus years in research on the research side. I've got 45 years in the collection side. And I've got all the in between with my own company where I supported major businesses, individuals, sheriff's departments, police departments, missing people, missing kids. I've got a lot of experience in this. And I've been tweaking that skill set all along the way. When I was first in the unit, like I said, I thought I was the most powerful psychic in the world when they told me I had such a good result at Stanford. So I didn't realize that ego impacts on it heavily. Ego's where you want to be in charge of everything. You want to be in control of everything. And in remote viewing, you can't be in control of any of it. It has to be that you have to take your mind that's in control and you have to back away and you have to let whatever happens. You can't make any assumptions. You just take whatever comes in and provide it. You don't make any judgment calls. So I went through 24 failures and I was about to the point of quitting and had a target where I didn't get anything, but I got a major headache. And when we did the feedback, it was a pretty poor target. I didn't get much on it. I just started getting a headache. And I said, the headache, I can't make it go away. There's something about this target that's giving me a headache. So we went to get the feedback. They took me to the actual target. And what it was the Fort Meade fire station, where they had a whole row of these fire trucks. And what I recognized when I saw the fire trucks is I kept getting this color, lime green. And in a million years, I never would have said a fire truck was lime green because they're all red, except on Fort Meade, they're lime green. And so we're parked in front of the fire station. And I said, well, I remember seeing the lime green, but I'm wondering where the headache came from. And that's when all the alarms went off. and all the doors opened and all the sirens came on. And we had to drive away from there very quickly because you couldn't even hear from all that noise. And I said, that's probably where I got the headache. So I started paying attention to more things about my perceiving versus seeing. That's when I started figuring it out, that remote viewing it's not really about seeing, it's about perceiving. And so I started paying attention to taste, smell, hearing, sight, emotions, physical impact, all these different things. And I started getting better and better at it. So my where I really came through was within a couple months of my beginning. I've been doing exercises, mostly practice, for about 6 months, trying to get better. And I finally got a couple operational missions to work on. And one of them had to do with a building in Severodvinsk, Russia. It's north of the Arctic Circle. There's a harbor there, and the harbor's almost always iced in. They keep two big icebreakers parked at the entry. But it's sort of a secret area, and they have a huge building there. I mean, it's a monster building that you could put a whole shopping center in, and it wouldn't touch the walls of the ceiling. I mean, it's just huge. And it had all kinds of guards around it, and fencing and security, and they had railroad tracks going in, so they were taking in carloads of materials that were covered, and the cars were coming out empty. And this had been going on for a number of years, and every intelligence agency had taken a crack at it. Nobody could get anything. They couldn't buy a picture of the inside of this building. I think they were offering millions of dollars for just a photograph of the inside. Couldn't get it. So that became my primary target. I and another man who was one of the original 6 viewers that was recruited. His name was Hartley Trent. And Hartley, in many ways, was a better remote viewer than I'll ever be. But Hartley and I were the two that were working on that particular target. And we both said the same thing on the same day. What we said was, they're building a different kind of submarine. And the reason we said submarine is because it looked like one. Only the difference was they were taking 2 sub-hulls and putting them together and then wrapping it. And they were using new welding techniques where they were using high-intensity lasers to do the welding. And some of the steel was 8 inches thick or thicker. And they had moved their launch tubes from the rear to the front, which was a totally different aspect. And anyway, over 3 or 4 psychic missions against this particular building, between the two of us, we came up with the idea that they were building this monster submarine that was the biggest submarine ever conceived. And they asked me, I remember they asked me one day, the monitor I was working with. Now, the monitor knows nothing either. What we found is the monitor can be as psychic as the psychic that's working the target. The monitor will sometimes ask exactly the right question to get the response that solves the problem. And we don't know how that works, but it does. And the monitor said, well, exactly how big is it? And I said, it's around 30 feet shy of the length of a Soviet aircraft carrier. And they said, oh, that's not possible. I said, but that's true. And there were some other things about they slanted the missile tubes so they could launch on the move, where before they had to stop the launch. That made them vulnerable. Things like that. And there was a whole lot of things I can't talk about, but we painted this huge picture of this huge submarine. And we sent that to the National Security Council. Now, National Security Council, this target had been bumped up to the National Security Council. They're like the end of the road. They get the the problems that no one else can solve, and they only work on one, and this was the target they had been working on, and they had nothing. And unfortunately, the man who was in charge of the analysis team at the National Security Council was Robert Gates. Robert Gates was the head Russian analyst. He ran the whole Russian floor of analysts in Langley at the time, the CIA. So he was on loan to the National Security Council. Well, he got our report, and when he saw our report, he sent it back. He refused to take it. He said, "This is total fantasy." And the reason he said it was total fantasy is because the building is not connected to the harbor. There's no way to launch anything out of this building. So he said it was total fantasy. Well, the man who brought it back to me, my remote viewing back to me, was a admiral by the name of Stewart. I had known Admiral Stewart for a number of years, so he knew me. He brought the reports back to me, and on top was a paper. It said Total Fantasy RG. And I said, "Who is RG?" And he said, "Robert Gates." And he explained to me that he was the senior Russian analyst. And I said, "Well, no, take it back. This is true." And he said, "Well, he's not going to take it." And I said, "Take it back and tell him he's got to pay attention to this." So he said, "Well, I'll take it back." And he picked it up, and I said, "Wait a minute." And I put my own paper on top. What I said was, "Fantasy will be launched in 112 days, Jay." and that was kind of a comical way of answering his note. It peeved me. It made me angry. And I wanted to let Robert Gates know, whoever Robert Gates was, he's an idiot. So Admiral Stewart took it. But what's interesting is he knew me. He knew that when I'm serious about something, it should be paid attention to. So en route back to the National Security Council, what he did is he went to the reconnaissance people, and he ordered up a couple overheads to take pictures 114 days out. He figured if I was correct, that would be the appropriate time. So that's what he did. And 114 days later, when they got their pictures back, there was this monster submarine parked right next to a Russian aircraft carrier. And they were put it next to the aircraft carrier to hide it from view at the entry of the harbor. And he said, "Unfortunately, you were wrong about the length. It's not 30 feet shy of the length of a Soviet aircraft carrier. It's 33 feet shy of the length of an aircraft carrier." So it embarrassed the hell out of Robert Gates. Now, Robert Gates eventually became the director of the CIA. While he was the director, he shut the remote viewing program down. I'm not saying the reason why here. I'm just saying it's interesting.
Yeah.
And then he eventually became the Secretary of Defense. I believe he's a political animal, and he's not a real military-tuned person. But what in fact happened is they opened the side of the building up, cut a channel from the building corner to the harbor, and launched it out of the end of the building. And nobody knew that would happen. But we knew that was a submarine, and it was a different kind of submarine. This submarine is so wide in the back. It's like, oh my God, it's like 35 meters across width-wise. It's huge. And it actually is two tubes married, which nobody in their right mind would build a submarine that way. But they did. And it was the TK-089. It was a prototype for the Typhoon-class submarine, which could park off of any country, 100 miles off of any country, and eradicate it in 18 minutes because it carried 20 MER 5s, all independent directable warheads. So Huge threat. What they did, the Russians did, is they made 8 more of them, and we never heard about the other 8. We never knew they built them. So the fact that we had all the intel from the photographs on that one gave us enough information to defend against it, I believe. I don't know for sure. I don't care. All I know is I tipped them off, and Hartley Trent tipped them off to the fact that that's what they were building. And no other intelligence agency could collect anything on it.
Did the results of your work in that case change how the intelligence community treat you going forward?
Oh, it changed it dramatically. Now, part of the people that became knowledgeable of that were very supportive. We had some senators, Senator John Glenn, who was an ex-astronaut, Senator Cohen, who has been a personal friend. Some of the senators were very supportive. They didn't care if it was psychics. They didn't care. We were getting good information, and they felt very supportive of us. But there were almost an equal number of people on the other side who, for religious reasons, didn't want to be participating. We were doing the work of the devil as far as they were concerned. I had to give demonstrations sometimes to the select subcommittee for intelligence, because they were the ones who would approve the money year to year. And the approval of the money that kept us in business was based on successes and failures. So we had to have at least enough successes to keep funding coming in for the next year. That kept us alive for 23 years. But eventually, the people that didn't like using psychics, because it was an affront to them religiously or spiritually, gained enough power to shut it down. That's my belief, only my belief, because I had senior senators walk away from me in rooms and accuse me of doing the work of the devil. I had other senators say I was doing God's work to keep it up. So
that sounds very familiar. I think to folks listening or watching this, the UFO topic. In recent years, we've heard about how many folks in the halls of government and the military, at the highest levels of power, see this as a demonic phenomenon, that these are demons.
Yeah, and it's not. It's a threat. The whole idea behind the Stargate program was to address a threat. We knew that the Soviets were using psychics. We didn't know if that was a threat or not. So the Gondola Wish program, which is what it was called at the beginning, it was designed to only last for 3 years. The first year, they would search out and find psychic people in the Army with clearances, bring them to the headquarters, train them, and then send them out in the world to target only our stuff, like the White House, the Pentagon, places like that, DIA, NSA, CIA, target those buildings. And then after a year of collecting, using only psychic ability, they would bring us back in, take that material and turn it over to an independent agency who would evaluate its value. If it was valuable, they would know then that it was a threat and needed to be countered. If it was trash, they know that that's probably as good as what the Soviets doing, and it didn't need to be defended against. Okay. What happened is we got the response on the submarine. Then we found a plane that went down over the Congo in Africa. It was carrying nukes. Everybody wanted to find that plane. Terrorists, everybody. They looked for that plane for 5 years. Nobody could find it. We had 3 psychics that found it in 4 hours. They put guys on, they roped in off of helicopters, and met natives on the ground carrying parts of that plane back to their area to patch holes in the roofs of their huts. So we found the plane, and President Carter gave an interview to news people where he actually said he was holding a folder and it said Grill Flame on it, which is the new name for the remote viewing unit. And a reporter asked him, "How did you find the plane after so long?" And he said, "We used our psychics." No, it was no longer Grill Flame. It became Center Lane then, and we all got moved. Everything changed. And we had our name changed like 5 or 6 times because everybody wanted to know about us, and everybody that found out about us talked about us. And it was pro and con then in arguments, and all we wanted to do was do the work because it worked. It was a threat. And we needed to determine, how do you block a remote viewer? Well, in 23 years, I can tell you, you can't. It's impossible. Now, what you can do is you can do exactly what they do now for encryption. You can delay them knowing something by hiding something. And what is that? Well, if you got a new kind of nuclear weapon, what you do is you park it in a bunker surrounded by old nuclear weapons.
Right.
Okay? It's hidden in a mass, or you hide it in a pile of the same thing, somewhat similar thing. A good remote viewer, it would take an excellent remote viewer to find it. Eventually they would, but by then it may not be as important to defend that information as before. It's like encryption. You encrypt something, I will tell you there's no encryption that can't be broken.
Yeah.
But it may take a half a year to do that. By then, the information is no longer of value. So it's of value. But they decided, for some silly reason, I don't know what it was, that they were going to shut it down, which they did. And it was of extreme value as far as I'm concerned. Now, the CIA says it never did anything of value for them. Well, I can tell you I did over 200 missions for the CIA. And they kept coming back for 23 years. So that, as they say in America, that dog don't hunt.
Yeah, that's what blows my mind with this. Pardon any kind of pun that might come across there. That this capability, whether people see it as a weapon, as an asset, as a mechanism for defense or attack, would be shut down by a superpower. That it just seems it was so useful and wielded such incredible results. Do you believe it still is happening now in some way, shape, or form?
No, I don't. And here's the reason why. There's 40 years of research behind remote viewing. That's the knowledge of how to make it work the best way possible. No one's ever come and gotten that information. And I can say that because we're sending it all to Rice University in Texas, in Houston, Texas, because they're the historians for this stuff. No one from any agency's ever come and asked us for help. And I participated for 35 years in the research side. I was tested the whole time, 35 years, and I never failed a test. In fact, I surprised many people. When the wall came down and things changed in Russia and other places, Ed May, the man running the unit, the research side, he and I went to Russia twice, and we met our counterparts. And I actually did experiments in their Dhaka outside of Moscow with their top psychic, and blew the minds of the Russian scientists who had never seen something happen like we did. And what we basically did was real simple. 2 deprivation chambers, half a mile apart, and we were told to decide first who was a sender and who was a receiver, and then pass a message. And we could invent that message. and we had 2 digipads in our laps. We were both in deprivation chambers, and we both arrived at the same conclusion simultaneously. You don't need to know who the sender and receiver is if both have the same message, right?
Mm.
Okay. So we put the message on the board, and when they brought us to the control room and turned on the computers, it was a butterfly. You could fold it out. They were outside of some very tiny differences. It was identical. They wouldn't even let us take a copy of that home with us. So, are the Russians still working at it? No. We know the 3-star admiral that was running their program. They shut theirs down too.
That blows my mind. I think that's crazy. And in general, we're going to move on to another session that happened, I believe, after your time in the Stargate program and whatnot, and on to some other parts of this conversation. But overall, what it says to me, I've written down here, surfing, like you said, you can't control remote viewing in a sense, but the information is always of a similar quality. You just get better. And for me, it's like a wave where you can learn to ride the wave, and you can learn to ride the wave better, but you can't control the wave. Is that fair?
That's right. Yeah, that's a fair statement. If there's information there of value that's that someone's attempting to hide or cover or blend in with something else, it will uncover it. You can't make it go away. If it's done properly, if it's like I said, if you're following the protocol exactly, it's possible to get information of value out of anything. You can't prevent it.
So one of the cases that so many people wrote to me asking me to ask you about is the Ancient Mars session. And I think that's when people bring up remote viewing, it's one of the most discussed cases. I know you'll have spoken about this, Joe, many times, but if you don't mind just reframing it for folks who may be unfamiliar and what that originally was all about.
What happened towards the end of my career, I was the only viewer left. Everybody else was dead. Mostly from complications from Agent Orange, cancers, all that sort of thing. I survived. Actually, I almost didn't. At the end of my career, when I retired, I had 5 heart attacks and open heart surgery. That's directly responsive to being under a huge amount of stress for 7 years. The stress was beyond belief. Working for these agencies was just, you can't even explain it. But at the time, when I was getting close to retirement, I was the only viewer left for about 18 months. So I was doing all the remote viewing. And I was having some problems with that. What they did is they decided they wanted to know, since I was always having spontaneous out-of-bodies from my near-death experience, they wanted to know if I could learn to control that. So what they did is they hired Robert Monroe, the man who authored Journeys Out of the Body, the first human to talk about out-of-body events. They hired him to train me, to teach me how to generate and control my otherwise spontaneous out-of-bodies. So the way it worked, I would do remote viewing from Monday morning to Thursday evening. When I finished my last remote viewing task on Thursday night, I would drive out to the Monroe Institute where Robert Monroe lived and get there about midnight, 11 o'clock. And I'd get up in the morning around 7:30 and meet him in his lab. And he would work with me in trying to train me on how to generate the out-of-body and control it. And we worked together in his lab on Friday, Saturday, and Sunday. And then 4 o'clock in the morning on Monday, I would drive back to Fort Meade and do remote viewing. I did that for 14 months. And every weekend, that's what I did. And so over that period of time, I eventually was able to do the capability. I can control an out-of-body. I can generate it. I can go somewhere and I can collect intelligence. Now, what's interesting in doing that, I think it scared people because DOD, the Department of Defense, said I did a demonstration, by the way. I did an actual target and was able to produce the details. And as a result, they shut it down completely. They said, we don't want you doing this anymore. You have to stop. Okay. It scared them because some of the data I collected was scary. So, but while we're doing this, I'm working in the lab with Bob Monroe on weekends, the DOD showed up one day. I think it was a Saturday, and I had been working all morning in the lab. And in the lab, when I'm working, I'm in a black box where I can't see anything. It's like a deprivation chamber. So I'm in there, and these people from DOD showed up and said, we have a target for Joe. And so Bob Monroe said, what is the target? And they said, we can't tell you. They gave him an envelope, which he folded over and put in his shirt pocket. And then they said, we need some answers about locations. And they had a list, I think, of 7 GPS locations on a card. And so I was taking a nap because it was lunchtime, and I was taking a nap to rest because doing this was making me pretty tired.
Yeah.
And so Bob Monroe woke me up. He said, I have some of your friends here from DOD, and they want to know some answers to locations. And I said, okay, give me the locations. So he read me the GPS locations. The very first GPS location I got had a pyramid. And I said, oh, this must be a new discovery somewhere. And he said, well, I don't know what it is, but we're interested in whatever you're seeing. And so I was producing a lot of data about this pyramid. And I said, it's really weird because this pyramid is huge. It's way bigger than the one in Giza. And it's built differently because the rooms inside are huge. They're large open rooms. I don't know how they did that from a construction standpoint. But I was talking about that. And then they gave me a second target location, and I went there and said some things about multiple pyramids. And then there was a straight road that went through some kind of an impact crater. And I was talking about this stuff, and the whole time I thought I was on Earth because I had never done anything on another planet. And GPS locations for me was earthbound. So I was just reporting what I was seeing or perceiving. And I started picking up on a background history of why there were no people there now, and that there had been an event that was cosmic in size, and that they had built these pyramids as sort of a survival method, a way of staying alive until somebody could rescue them, because it affected the climate in that area and everything else. And so things started not making any sense to me. I was pretty tired by the time we got to the 7th location. So I said, I'm sorry, I can't do the 7th location. I just can't hold it any longer. And so they said, that's fine. So I came out and I said, so where? Oh, I remember during the session, I said to Bob Monroe, I said, the sun looks really weird. And he said, I don't care about the sun. Keep working on what you're seeing or perceiving at that location. So I kept doing that. So I came out of the booth, the deprivation chamber, and I said, so what's this target? And they said, well, we don't know. We just brought it in the envelope. And Bob Monroe has the envelope. So I said, let me see the envelope. So Bob took it out of his shirt and he handed it to me. Now, none of us knew what the target was until I opened that envelope. When I opened the envelope, pulled the paper out, it said Mars 1 million BC. That really pissed me off because I don't like doing targets that I don't have ground truth for. I need ground truth because that's the only way I can perfect my skill set.
Like verification.
Yeah, I need to be able to verify at least part or piece of it. So I got really angry. And I said, give me the card. So they gave me the card with the GPS locations. I kept the envelope in the paper. And I said, I'm keeping all this. And they said, why? And I said, because the next time I'm on the West Coast, I'm going to go to Jet Propulsion Laboratory where they store all the films. And I'm going to get film confirmation for this. And they said, they'll never give it to you. And I said, no, they're going to give it to me. I was really angry. So next time I went to the West Coast to Stanford Research Institute, I took a day off and I went to JPL. And I went to the counter where they sold all the negatives and pictures and everything that they take of space. Now, what most people don't know is every picture they take in space is done with tax money from us. So they can't classify those pictures. They have to release them. But you have to know what you're asking for. You can't go in and say, give me the one that has that pyramid. They'll say, which one? Okay. So I took the card and I walked up to the counter and I said to the guy, he said, can I help you? And I said, yeah. And I handed him the card with the GPS locations on it. I said, I'd like to see there's 4x4 negatives. They're about this size. I'd like to see the 4x4 mapping negatives for these locations. And on the negative, it's like 100 by 100 miles. But they have the tick marks on the outside for GPS. And so he took one look at the card. All he did was look at it. And he said, oh, that's the old city on Mars. And he pulled a drawer up and handed me a packet. So I came back with it. I took the negatives, went into town to a photography place. I gave them a copy of the GPSs and the negatives. And I said, blow these up the best you can. I want to know if what I described is in these pictures. And everything I described is on those negatives. And they blew them up the best they could so you could see. So that's all in my Mind Trek book. I was pretty sure that everything I said was correct.
And I've not read the Mind Trek book yet, but are the pictures in there? Are any of those negatives still available? Or did what happened with the information like that?
I have the negatives, but I got to tell you, I've got 22 banker boxes of information. And I've been shipping stuff to Rice University because they want all my papers. So I haven't got a clue where they are right now. But they are, the actual photographs from those negatives is in my book, my Mind Trek book.
I'll definitely be checking that one out because I've not got to that yet. But also, when you've mentioned Rice University, for folks who are maybe unsure, that's Jeff Kripal. That's the Archives of the Impossible.
Right,
I've hosted Jeff on the podcast, so that's good to know that they're in good hands. We'll say that much.
Everything I've ever done in almost 50 years is going to be at Rice.
Excellent. And thinking on that then, because it's a fascinating case, and everything you've said so far, Joe, it sounds like there are very few limitations, perhaps, on remote viewing. You've said before in interviews that time is largely immaterial. You can go deep into the past. You've remote viewed Mars 1 million BC, but I've heard you talk about future targets being more limited. Is that right?
Oh yeah, it's much more difficult going into the future, and there's a reason why. When you go into the past, everything that has occurred or did occur or would occur or might have occurred in the past, we understand the concepts of reality that make it so. In other words, the first flight by the Wright brothers or whoever did the first flight, it happened in the past. We know how planes fly in the air now, so it's not a big surprise to us to know that somebody built a plane and got off the ground first. That's not a big surprise. But where you get a surprise is in going to the future, because the example I use is if in 1975 you were to target a specific room in Sylvania Corporation as a remote viewer, what you would probably get in targeting that room is a glass tube with this sort of cloud-like roiling energy in this tube, and there would be a pencil-thin beam of light, and you would see that light chewing its way through 4 inches of stainless steel. And on the other end, you would hear a thump, 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 thump. And you could provide all those details. But if somebody said, what is that? You couldn't tell them. You couldn't tell them anything about it. It's like, holy crap, they're using a light beam to chew through metal. How do they do that? I don't know. You know, the conceptualization for a high energy pump laser doesn't yet exist. So what people would say to the remote viewer is, you're nuts. You're crazy. That's not possible. Okay. So going just a little bit into the future, maybe it's a month, you can be reporting on things in great detail you have absolutely no understanding for. And I've done targets like that. And I've done a target like that in the out-of-body condition. And I will tell you, when you do a target like that and you bring it back in such detail, where you can draw an engineering drawing, you know, front view, top view, side view, cut away all the parts, name as many of the parts as you can and what their function is, and you get a feeling for what it might be able to do, it's scary. But when you do that and you hand it to somebody in the DOD, they go, whoa, wait a minute, stop, don't go any further, because it's something they're working on. Okay, and you just accessed it in detail. That's scary. That really makes people worried, because I could build that in a garage. You understand? So
yeah.
No, they don't want that capability out there. They don't want anybody to have that capability out there. So how do they deal with that? Well, they release everything, supposedly, on remote viewing. Only they dump all the files on the floor and they shuffle everything together in a big mess. And they release it out. And every Tom, Dick, and Harry that hears the word remote viewing suddenly goes, oh, that's easy. I just close my eyes and give them a drawing. And before you know it, it's not even valid anymore, because the protocol has disappeared into the woodwork. And maybe that's necessary. Maybe that should happen. You know, I'm a firm believer that there's a lot of things wrong with what we do. And because I believe that because we can do something doesn't necessarily mean we should do it. You know, I can tell you I got as far as I did in remote viewing because I have a solid foundation that I clearly understand my own personal morality and ethics. I will tell you, it's a baseline I'm willing to die for. I don't think many other people know what they will or won't die for. But it's the very reason that I have a clear understanding for what I should or shouldn't be doing, that I can talk about things, and there are things I won't do. So I think there are a lot of people out there that don't have those boundaries. And I think that there's a lot of people out there that do things simply because they can. And that's creating a huge problem for humanity. We need to pay more attention to not doing some things just because we can. It just brings out too many problems, because the first place somebody wants to go with something when it's got a lot of energy or a lot of power or a lot of capability is militarily.
Yeah.
And we don't need more of that, believe me. I mean, we're getting into an area now where we're capable of fighting proxy wars using machines. And we're introducing AI. That's insanity. That's my personal belief. You can't teach morals and ethics to a machine. It just won't happen. And so,
do you think you've mentioned AI, Joe? Do you think AI is going to change our relationship with consciousness?
It'll change our relationship with pretty much everything. And in some ways, that's okay. But in many ways, again, we'll be doing things maybe we shouldn't be. So we're sort of opening the door to a capability we don't know enough about. Control it. And where you can't control things, why do you play in that? A good example, when they decide they're going to find the God particle and they built the CERN accelerator in France and Switzerland, that was a great idea. It was huge, multi-billion-dollar project, fastest accelerator on the planet. We're going to get to the basis of reality and existence. But they also theoretically suggested it might open the door to a black hole that would consume the Earth. But they did it anyway. How insane is that? You understand? It's like...
Yeah. It's that clip from the movie Oppenheimer when they're talking about the chance of it igniting the sky. Yeah. And he says almost zero. And they're like, almost zero? And he's like, yeah, almost zero. There's a chance.
Like, what's wrong with these people? They want to go down in history as the eradicator of the human species. I mean, no morality, no ethics, no contemplation for what might happen. But it's crazy. One of the things I do like about remote viewing is you have a capacity for seeing ahead from a perspective that's different any other way. In other words, you can actually go ahead and report on the effects or results of something. You may not know exactly why they're happening, but you will certainly be able to report on them.
Did you ever feel when remote viewing you were being watched or something was viewing you? Like you're tapped into a stream of information that something else was aware you were there?
Oh, I know that. And it has to do, in fact, you'd be very interested in this because it had to do with me targeting a UFO. I don't generally target UFOs, and the reason I don't is because there's no ground truth. But I can't select my own target, so I wind up targeting them occasionally. Most of the time, they were machines. Okay, to be honest, they're machines. Even if there were entities inside, they weren't what I would call intelligent entities. They were programmed entities. The alien robots are live. We build robots out of machines. So a lot of the people that they say are obviously aliens of different descriptions, they're just simply grown in a lab and they're programmed to do certain things. It's the reason they have so much indifference towards us. They're robots, for any other word. But I got targeted on one UFO one time many years ago, maybe 20 years ago. And as soon as I opened to the target, I was recognized as penetrating an area I shouldn't have been in. I was able to capture maybe 2 glimpses perceptively and in Shutdown. And part of it worried me because whatever entity was in that UFO knew instantly that I was there from a mental standpoint. And so I was concerned that there might be retribution for that. But the retribution turned out to be interesting because every time I went back, and I went back to that target a number of times with the idea that maybe I'll catch them off guard. No, you don't. Every time I went back to that target, I would get the same information. So for 6 months, I got the same thing over and over and over and over again. And what it was, I don't know if you remember the old Vietnam peace symbol. It was a line down like this and then 2 lines under it.
Yep.
Okay, like an upside down Y.
Mm-hmm.
But it was in a circle. Well, that upside down Y is all I could get for 6 months. And I tried to figure out, what is it connected to? What does it mean? How is it used? Is it a symbol for something? Is it this, that? I couldn't get any further with it. And one day I had an epiphany. And you know what that is? That's the inside and outside corner of an empty box. As soon as I concluded that, it went away. And it was replaced by 3 boxes. Now I get 3 boxes for another 6 months, stacked all different ways. But they're all equal. They all look the same. They just are never perceived in the same positions. They move around, they change all the time. So I dealt with that for quite a while. I can't even remember how long. And then suddenly that changed because I had another epiphany. I remembered when I was a little kid, my parents gave me 3 blocks, and they were wrapped in plastic. I undid the plastic. It was 3 blocks, and it had letters: A, B, C, D, E, F, G on one, H, I, J, K on the other, and numbers on the other with the ends of the alphabet. Mm-hmm. So it's the alphabet and the numbers, and I was supposed to learn numbers and alphabet from it. Okay. As soon as I realized that, now I get multiple blocks. I'm getting sometimes 7, sometimes 11, sometimes 3, multiple blocks with a single symbol on it. Now, why is that happening? I think I'm supposed to try to figure out what the symbol represents. And that's what I'm working on now. But this is a slow process. This has been going on for 5 years. So, what is that all about? I suspect, and this is again, this is information that has come along with the processing that I do in my head. The information I'm getting is there's no way that whatever civilization that entity comes from, we're never going to know that entity. And here's the reason why. They're 500,000 years ahead of us. So on one side, you got this group of entities 500,000 years ahead. And on this side, you got a lot of immature people. That's us. Okay. We do things because we can, not because we should. Okay. If those 2 groups ever came together, it would destroy both. There's just no way we'd ever get along. We'd want what they have, and they wouldn't want us to have it. Right there, eradicating conflict. They'd have to put us down. It just can't happen. I understand that. So I think they're viewing what they're doing with me as a way of maybe teaching. In all my thinking about the way the target changes or improves, I'm also getting a lot of feeling about why. Why not? Why yes? Why why because? All those kinds of things. And I don't like it because I feel like I'm being controlled. But I can understand why. Because we're a dangerous species.
Yeah.
Here's my fear. Less than 100 years ago in America, we were in covered wagons going west. We didn't even have a country yet. And in truth, we were still dividing up into states and stuff, are settling in the West and creating new businesses and things. We're still a growing, changing world because humans hopefully are improving and not dissolving. But however that's happening, the problem I'm having is that our greatest discoveries are accidental. When we discovered the use of nuclear energy to produce a weapon, that's the first thing we did. We made a weapon out of it.
Yeah.
And we vaporized 2 cities full of people because we could. Now, the excuse is it prevented a lot of deaths continuing to the end of the war. That's bull. They could have stopped the war any other way. They didn't. They wanted to use those weapons, okay? So what if the next thing is we discover, well, it's obvious that you're not going to go from star to star and meet other entities in a fire wagon. And that includes UFOs. I don't care if you're traveling at 5 times the speed of light. It's still going to take you 50 years to get to office of jury. So it's a waste of time. I think you get from star to star by folding out of this dimension and folding into that dimension. You don't even travel through space. You travel through other, or whatever that is, okay? What if we suddenly discover that capability? Should we or shouldn't we? If we decide we should, we have just become a threat to a 500,000-year-old advanced civilization because they know we're going to travel star to star, and the back room in that ship is going to have a nuke. You know that. So what'll happen? We'll get knocked back to sticks and stones. We'll suffer a double massive flare out of the sun or whatever. We suffered a flood that killed most of the people on the planet at one time. Natural disaster is the way we're being controlled. And so if we become a threat, a serious threat, we're going to be back and living in caves and hunting animals again with spears. Because when you regress, it's all the way down to the flint. It doesn't stop halfway because you lose 20% of your capability. You can't build a factory anymore. You understand? So I think we need to pay attention to our morals and our ethics as an answer to our introduction to a race or species of entities that's 500,000 years ahead of us. That's a wise move, where wanting to meet and try to get something from them is not a wise move. And so that's just my personal opinion. It could be wrong, but I sure wouldn't want to be thought of as a threat to those entities, whoever they are.
I can understand that. And listen, I want to ask, we're going to get to some listener questions just to finish off.
Sure.
You've answered so many already in the body of the interview. But I want to know, how closely do you follow modern ufology and the UFO topic and what's happened in the last few years with Congress and David Grush and those folks coming forward?
I follow it pretty closely. Ryan Wood and his father, I've known them forever. And in fact, I went to a couple possible crash sites with Ryan back many years ago. And it was clear that most of them were other things. But there was one site we went to where it was obvious to me it had been a UFO crash and somebody had come and gotten it. There were still marks in the desert floor from the big heavy equipment that came and pulled it away. So I know that stuff's out there, but and I know they have this stuff and they've probably been working away on it, but I suspect it's going to take another couple hundred years to understand it. But I kind of follow along with it. What I become concerned about is the leaps of judgment that many make. I don't like some of the people in the UFO community that try to out people, because I think they're doing it in a nefarious way, in a bad way. There probably are people in government that know more, but I don't think being hostile towards them and trying to out them in some way to force them to give information up is a wise thing to do. I think in the long run, what they would probably do before giving it up is destroy it. Just my view.
I agree, Joe. I don't think the gatekeepers and the powers that be are sitting on social media, scrolling through X and Facebook, thinking, oh, well, some of these folks want us to give them all the information. Should we do it? They don't care. And I think these things have to be done the right way. And I think there are some good people trying to work on this in various different ways.
And what my preference would be is if they were to come and allow some people with an obvious bent towards being more ethically inclined to bring them in on it and help make those decisions on what should be released and what shouldn't be. I don't think governments are smart enough to do that. I think everything is geared towards weaponry, towards modernizing armies and air forces and that sort of thing, because that's where the money is. In the world right now is a swamp of avarice and greed and whatnot. That's clear. When 40 to 60% of almost any country on the planet is fighting to live, and it's got a 0.5% at the top that owns or controls more than half of its GNP, there's something wrong with that picture.
Yeah.
It just isn't proper. Anyway, that's politics. But politics are dangerous.
Yes, I'm very apolitical, and people tell me I'm not, but I genuinely am, and I know I am because folks on the right and left of politics both tell me a lot of different stuff. I get emails from all over, folks in the United States, folks from Europe, folks from the UK. No matter who you vote for, the government gets in, and that's what happens. So yeah,
I always felt, I did 20 years in the Army, most of it overseas, doing defensive stuff against terrorism and that sort of thing. And so I always felt like my job was to defend people's rights to be left or right or centrist or whatever. And so many times I didn't even vote because I felt like it was a betrayal of that neutrality, because I was overseas doing the good fight. What disturbs me now is that people want to force me into some framework, and they don't understand me at all if they think that way, because I will support what I think is just, and I won't what I think isn't just. So, I reserve the right to do that, and that's all my boundaries. As long as I control my own boundaries, I don't have any problem.
And rightly so. And listen, Joe, I had so many questions, like I say, from people. What I've done, folks, normally I read your name out and I go through the question, but Joe had easily over 100 questions. So what I've done is I've gone through them all multiple times, and I've tried to amalgamate the questions into, I've reworded them essentially, Joe, and tried to group them in. The chances are, folks, if you've asked a question, you've heard a variation of the answer, or it's been asked directly. So there we go. But listen, let's fly through these I've got like 6 or 7 here, Joe, to finish off with.
Let's do it.
First off, were you ever given targets that felt ethically questionable?
Oh, yeah. And I've deliberately failed on them. I did a target on national television, 31 million viewers in Japan. And I was asked to describe where a woman on a panel, they pulled her up on the stage and said, "Can you tell us where she was at 8 o'clock on last Saturday?" And I said, "Sure." And when I said sure, I felt a blast of fear coming out of her. So I went ahead and did the remote viewing, and for some ugly reason, it failed. And I had to turn to the audience and bow and say, "I apologize. It's all on me. I thought I could do it. I couldn't do it this time." And then later, when the program was taped and done, and I was in the green room, she came and visited me and thanked me profusely. She said, "I knew you knew where I was." And here's the problem. Because of her job, she was 23 years old. Because of her job, if I had said in detail where she was and what she was doing, there was nothing wrong with it, except it would have ruined her career right on the spot.
Okay.
She wasn't doing anything wrong. She was doing exactly what any mother would do. And the problem was she wasn't married. So it would have killed her career right on the spot. And I chose to not be successful. I've done that a number of times, and I'll just take the heat for it. I don't care.
I will just add, Joe, I've not asked you on this episode, but I do love the time you went on Japanese TV. I think one of your first ever appearances, and I was telling someone this in the gym earlier today, and you were on, it was like a show where there was a panel of skeptics, a panel of believers.
Yeah, right.
And you had to essentially remote view where someone had gone in a bullet train, could have been anywhere, and you described the woman standing in water. There was fake trees, a fake background.
Yeah.
And they laughed at you because in Japan, nothing inside would be fake. We don't do that. And she was essentially standing in like a pond with like a kid's little house behind her, and you were right, weren't you?
Yeah, they actually, while she was talking to the camera, in the background, they overlaid my drawing of the tea house over the tea house, the fake tea house, and it was identical.
And what I wasn't sure of, you said when I saw you talking about that a couple of times, the head of the University of Tokyo for physics or something.
The head of the physics department at the University of Tokyo, he made a very impassioned speech, about 3-minute speech before we started the program. And what he said was, and it was filmed, and what he said was, "If I can't show you the trick that he uses, I'll resign my position as the head of the physics department at Tokyo University." And in fact, he came in 3 days in a row afterwards and went through frame by frame by frame. Couldn't find where I was slipped the answer or knew the answer or any of that. And so I asked the studio, I said, "Did he resign?" And they said, "No." And I said, "What happens if he doesn't?" And they said, "He'll never appear on Channel 4 in Tokyo again." So
I do love that story.
Yeah.
I shared that today in the gym with a few people, and they liked that. Other question for you was, besides Mars and the submarine case, both of which you've shared on this show, what was the most surprising or strange operational target you were given?
I think the strangest target was a Russian spy that they caught in another country, and that particular country brought him to America, and they wanted to know some very specific things about him, and I answered all their questions, and then later they found out that he was also gay, and they said that would have been important because we could have used that as leverage. And I said, I don't, because I know everything about somebody, maybe, why would I give you the stuff you don't need? In other words, this was a specific operation in a certain way for a certain reason. And I'm not going to give you all that extraneous stuff to go back and use it to blackmail or something. No, that's not what it's about. And the very first target I had that was an American citizen, it was brought in by an agency, and I think Hartley Trent did the same thing. When they took us in the room to do the remote viewing, and we started remote viewing, the first thing I did is I stopped and I said, "I need to know something first." And they said, "What's that?" I said, "Is there a warrant issued by a judge?" because in America, you can't target a U.S. citizen without a warrant. And when I asked that, the person got really upset and said, "Hey, nobody's going to know." And I said, "No, you're wrong. I will.
Yeah.
Find a warrant and I'll give you what you want." But that's occurred actually on some news programs where in foreign countries where I've been asked to disclose information on someone. It happened in Budapest, Hungary, and I gave them a lecture on personal privacy. And when I went back 3 months later to visit the psychologist that was working with us, I came out of customs, and the professor came over and gave me a big hug, and he said, "I'm so glad to see you got through customs." I said, "Well, why wouldn't I?" And he said, "Because if you had described that guy on the national news program, that was to support a group of 5 people who were out to assassinate the new president. That was the new president. If I had told him where he was and what he was doing, they might have hit him right there. I would never get out of jail in Budapest, Hungary."
Wow.
So first thing I always do is ask, should I or shouldn't I?
Well, moving back into UFOs, you were asked by a lot of folks around this. Were you ever tasked with viewing Russian or Chinese UFO-related programs?
No, I don't remember ever being. Oh, I take that back. One time I was asked about the Chinese program, and but the information that came out of it was negligible. I don't think they really had much of a program. I think.
Or is that difficult for you to look at? Because again, it's the verification aspect of it, of what does a flying saucer look like, or what does a craft or a being look like?
Yeah, well, you can get a really good description of the craft, but where the problem comes in is, what are they doing with it? And
Right.
and there's a cultural difference there, and for the differences with the Chinese and anybody else, it's completely different, because they look at their professors, their researchers, and everything differently than we do. If they have snow white hair and they're in their 80s, they make no mistakes. Okay, so anything they say is accepted as truth. In America, that would never happen. We'd question anybody for their background, their intelligence, how they were trained, all those sorts of things, if they're a researcher. Chinese don't do that. Everything's perfect for a man over 80 with snow white hair. He can decide what's real and not real, and they'll buy it. So,
Fair enough.
Good is that?
Yeah. No, that's fair. And you were asked about reviewing, remote viewing famous UFO incidents. For example, Roswell. Did you ever review anything like that?
Yeah, I have done that for 3 crash sites. One crash site, it turned out, was a bomber that came down. It was treated just like a UFO collection. They raked the ground, they put everything in sacks, loaded all on low boys, every piece of wreckage, everything. The reason why, it was in 1940, just before our introduction into the Second World War, and it was carrying one of the 2 prototype Norden bomb sites. Okay, that's for bombing from high altitude at night. It made it more accurate. They did not want one piece of that bomb site getting in anybody's hands. So it was all treated identical to how you would collect a UFO.
Sure.
That's the one that sticks out in my mind the most. But there were 2 others. One, we never were able to confirm or deny anything about it. But another was one we felt was truly a UFO site. What was interesting about that is there was some material collected from it, and we actually went back to the place where they stored it, and were able to access the safe. And it was, the logbook was there with it logged in, but it was no longer in the safe. So we were unable to obtain it.
And have you ever encountered alternate timelines or dimensions in your work?
I don't believe in them. I already believe that every human being on this planet is in a world of their own. And the reason I say that is you're always with different people. And when you go and do something where you're alone and you come back and you're with people you know, and they say, "What did you do yesterday?" You can tell them, but they can never know that for sure. They have to take your word for it, which means you're in a different bubble of the world than they are. So our worlds are all different, and how we express them comes out in our interaction with one another. It's why it's important that we don't shut down when we meet somebody that's new or somebody different. They have information that could be of value to us always. So you want to make friends with everybody you meet. Even people you don't like, you can learn from. You learn from your enemies. Some of it's not good. You may be making assumptions that are wrong, and that's why they remain your enemy. Where in fact you may find common ground, and it makes the enemy idea go away. You know, it's just I've always felt every human being's in a different world than mine, and I can learn something from them. And so I've always wanted to be as open as possible with people. I don't want to deny anybody or condemn them automatically. I mean, there are bad people in the world. I've met evil people, and I won't have anything to do with them. But I have to meet them and really come to know that first.
In your near-death experience, you described distressed souls in a tunnel. What did they look like, and what did that experience mean to you?
When I had that experience, I was DOA 38 minutes. I had no breathing and no heartbeat. Now I don't believe that. I think maybe I had a heartbeat every 6 minutes. Maybe I took a shallow breath every now and then. But that's immaterial. I was out of body the whole time watching the entire event. So when I eventually was in the emergency room watching them cutting the clothing off me, I felt heat on the back of my neck, and I thought it was one of those bright lights in the ceiling. So I turned around to see if I was close to one, and I was enveloped in a more intense light, white light. It was 10 times more intense. But it didn't bother me because I no longer had my eyes. I figured I was just in a pure form there. I know my body wasn't there. I was just one with this light. And my perception was that it was God. I got in an argument with the voice in the light because the voice said, "You can't be here. You have to go back." And I said, no, I don't want to go anywhere, because it was so comfortable. And then I woke up, I sat up, and I was covered with a sheet. I had tubes all in me. So I kept telling people, God's a white light. You can't cease to exist. You come with you. You are gifted with all the knowledge of all the effects you've had on everybody you've ever interacted with, and then some. And it sort of paints you with a brush and colors that says, "This is what I am." That's heaven and hell, by the way. You can either be painted very, very dark, or you can be painted very, very bright. And that depicts how you're received by others in that state. But I started telling people that in the military, put me in a rest home for 2 weeks because they thought I had serious brain damage. So I wouldn't stop talking about it. And the third psychiatrist I was with said, "You have to act normal or you're not going to leave here." So I started acting normal. I got reassigned to a different unit. But they let everybody think I was dead. Anyway, I matured a lot. But for 6 months afterwards, I hated being here because this is so primitive. I thought of about 30 ways of taking my own life. I was seriously contemplating that. And one night I got pull back out of body, back into that light. And some entity, and I don't think it's God now, but it may have been a reflection of me. I don't know. But I got speed slapped and told, look, if you know what's going to happen when you die, why don't you pay more attention to being here? Do something right. And so I've been trying to do what I can here. And what's interesting about that is I've had like 3 or 4 near-death experiences where I've come so close, and right at the last second, it gets reversed. And it's like, you still aren't done, go back. You still aren't done, go back. And I've had MRSA twice in the hospital after surgeries. The second time I had 108 temperature, 107 temperature. I almost died. They fought 33 hours to keep me alive. I was ready to go. I didn't go. It's like every time I think it's going to happen, I'm sent back. So I don't know if I'm doing something right or I'm doing something wrong. Depends on your viewpoint on where you want to be. I do know that everybody has an opportunity to do good, and good's relative. Good for how you view it. You got to do what you perceive as the right thing, and not do something just simply because you want it. I don't. What's interesting is I lack for nothing. I have anything I want when I need it, and my wife is cared for, and I'm comfortable, and I don't need a lot. I'm enjoying this place now.
A lot of folks asked you once from you've remote viewed your own death, and a lot of folks were asking, why did you do that, and has it changed the way you live?
It's changed it greatly. I don't think it's possible to remote view death itself. There's a gate there. You can't get past it. I used to make fun of mediums. I used to walk in the office sometimes and pick a stapler up and go, oh, I'm getting a message from the dead, that kind of, the guy who made this stapler. I made fun of mediums because I didn't believe in it. And then I was working a problem where an undercover agent had disappeared, and they didn't know why. And I had discovered that he drove off the road and wrecked his car and died. And they said, how do you know he's dead? And I said, because he's floating horizontally in front of me with his hands crossed on his chest and his eyes are closed and he's drifting away. And they said, the monitor said, oh, this is where we can find out about death, right? So he says, follow him. And I said, okay. And I'm trying to follow him. I said, I can't get closer to him. He keeps getting further away. And he says, follow him anyway. You're a remote viewer. You can do anything. And I said, I can't get. And he kept yelling at me. And I said, look, there's these gauze-like things coming down. It's making me more difficult to even see him. I can't get through them. And he said, well, do it anyway. And I said, look, I can't go beyond the veils. And as soon as I said it, I went, I just got taped being a medium.
Yeah.
So I changed my whole attitude. I went to a place in New York where they have mediums, and I spent 3 or 4 days there with them. And then I went down to Florida to where they have them down in Florida. And I spent 2 or 3 days down there, and I met these mediums, and they're truly good people. They're honest people. They're actually helping. Now, some of them aren't as gifted as others, like some remote viewers aren't as gifted as other remote viewers, but they're trying. And so I don't badmouth mediums anymore. I know exactly what they're doing, and I think they're doing a good work. So, do we know
Final
about
question?
That? No.
Final question, Joe, because you've been with me such a long time and you've been so good in this interview. I really appreciate it, and I'm sure folks have loved it. Looking back over your life and your career now, what do we still most misunderstand about consciousness, or whatever that might be?
About consciousness, you have to remember that you got to remember this, okay? Everything we think is real isn't. our entire consciousness, even the part that's in our head, is locked inside a bone box. The only way we know anything is through the sensing devices that we have. Ears, the smeller, the eyes, skin. There's all kinds of sensing devices we have for interpreting our environment. What we are actually walking around in is an energy field, a massive energy field filled with all kinds of different energies. And they all represent something. And these sensors tell us that we're actually in a world, okay? But that world is our creation. No two people on the planet create the same world. It's a mistake to make the assumption that we all are talking about the same thing. We're not. We're talking about our personal perceptions. So to label people because they don't think like you is wrong. To label somebody because they do think like you is wrong. We can learn from everybody, and we shouldn't condemn anyone because we don't like how they perceive or how they present. There's a reason for that. We need to know the reason. We don't need to condemn them. And so, you know, people are flawed. We're all flawed because we have to deal with reality through a sensing system that's dysfunctional. The one thing we have an advantage on is that all of our mind is not here. All of our mind is. It's the reason why this whole energy field exists. I think we have an agreement that it's all here because it's a place we can come and experience and do things that teach us something about who and what we are. And in terms of knowing God, I think God is just as blind as we are. I think God is a neutral creation that has no understanding for what it is. And we are like the fingers. We're the examples or the experiment that goes out and discovers and learns and understands what good and evil is to help God understand what God is. In other words, we're all part of the Creator. And if we're all part of the Creator, then we have a potential to be extraordinarily good and not evil. So I just prefer to be extraordinarily as good as I can be. Doesn't mean I don't make mistakes. I really do. I screw up big time sometimes. I paid for that, but you know, I've just become a lot more open, I think, understanding that I'm different like everybody else is.
That's all for this episode of That UFO Podcast. Thank you so much for listening and watching. If you enjoyed the show, please follow, subscribe, and leave a rating or review wherever you get your podcast. It really helps others find the show. If you're watching on YouTube, hit like, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you don't miss future episodes. You can also support the show directly and get early access, ad-free episodes, and bonus content on Patreon or by subscribing on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or YouTube memberships. All the links are over at thatufopodcast.com or in the show description below, along with merchandise and more. Don't forget you can also pick up a copy of my book, Atlas of Unidentified Flying Objects, available now in all good bookstores and through online retailers, including Amazon. Big thank you again to all of you for listening and tuning in. Until next time, keep looking up. You never know what you might see.
It wasn't a tic-tac and not quite a saucer, more like a hubcap designed by Chaucer, a little baroque and quite steampunk, like Alice was playing bass for the Parliament of Folk. The little fucker hovered right outside of my window, and when I shoved out the screen, he made it an issue.